Good morning. Good to see you this morning. Glad you're here. Hey, before we jump into Mark chapter 8 this morning, want to just take a moment. In the first service, I did the same thing because there's just such a buzz about things, and sometimes, just as events in the world encroach on our world, it has our minds captive. And probably one of the things that's taken the minds of the church so captive over the last few weeks has been the events taking place at Asbury College and Seminary in Wilmore, Kentucky. And so I've been asked multiple times about what do I think about the Asbury revival. Is it real? Is it a revival? What is it? I thought rather than repeating myself 11 times or whatever, I would just simply tell you at once, because I think it is significant. It's a important event unfolding, and of course, if you've spent any time on social media, there is this wide diverging of opinion over those events, people trying to, categorize it, explain it, or explain it away. People saying there should be more miracles, or there should be, or it's too emotional, or, everybody's got an opinion on it. And so, I am mindful, George Whitefield, who was one of the early revivalists preceding the Great Awakenings in the Americas. He was one of the people who was a founder of the Methodist Church before it was the Methodist Church. He was part of Wesley's Holy Club and an Anglican priest, and had just a different perspective than the Wesleys, but was very much a part of what God was doing in that time. And he was asked one time, after he'd done a very large open-air meeting, someone was wanting to quantify and qualify everything that happened in that event. And they said, well, how many people got saved? And his response was beautiful, and I thought so apropos to this moment, is he said, I don't know. He says, let's give it 6 months and I'll tell you. And what they were looking for was how many people raised their hand, how many people got baptized, how many people, were talking about it afterwards or whatever else. And they had their ways that they wanted to qualify it. And as he looked at it, he said, well, we won't really know the results for another 6 months. If in 6 months from now we see that the fruit of that has brought life, then we could call that a revival, we could call that salvation. But if you're just talking about a response in the heartbeat of a moment, that really there's no way to quantify that. There's no way to give voice to that in a way that is reflective or thoughtful or whatever. Right now, I have a number of friends who are at Asbury, a number of them working on their PhDs, a couple of people working on doctorate of ministry, and a friend that's working on a Master of Divinity. Not that important from that aspect, but I'm just simply saying they are very much a part of the college and the seminary atmosphere there, have been there for a while. The Vineyard has a not well publicized, but a small house of a school that is situated on the campus. A lot of denominations and things like that will have a school of study on another seminary because they don't have their own seminary. And so they'll just kind of do some things to encourage people to attend a particular seminary or whatever. Nonetheless, these friends of mine that are there and experiencing it are just saying that they said, look, I don't know how to qualify it. I simply know that God seems to be doing a deep work in the heart and lives of people. And they joined with the words of Whitefield. I don't know, let's give it a little bit. We'll find out what it is. If it's nothing more than emotion, then it'll be nothing more than emotion, right? And if it's something much more significant than that, then it will bear its fruit, and that will show us. Likewise, when we talk about the Great Awakenings, the first and second Great Awakening, one of the things that people don't realize, that one of the leaders of that, Jonathan Edwards, he was actually the president of Princeton Theological Seminary. Not exactly a place where you think of revival breaking out, right? And but Jonathan Edwards, when he was speaking, one of the things that was noteworthy from a historical standpoint was that he literally read his manuscript sermons monotone. And everybody accused him of inciting emotionalism. Have you ever listened to somebody read a long manuscript? monotone. It's not exactly the kind of thing that causes people to, if people do roll into the aisles, it's usually because get me out of here, right? Instead, there was something that was happening, but there were things that accompanied those moments that were, really hard to categorize, hard to explain, and people were attacking him over that and accusing him of all kinds of things, of manipulation and all. And, and he said something really, I thought, profound, was he said, listen, I have no doubt that there's people that are just responding, in their flesh. He goes, let's weigh it out this way. When somebody falls on the ground and lays there for hours and they get up and they claim to have had a religious experience, but they go back to being a womanizer, jerk, self-centered, selfish, abusive person, well then clearly what happened was nothing but emotionalism. On the other hand, if that person gets up off the floor and they go home and they start taking care of their wife and feeding their children, and they become better persons in the community of faith and are helping others, and they become generous of spirit and heart, then let's call that what it is it's a deep work of God. But rather than trying to explain things by it should have had this or it should have had that sometimes we just need to let God be God, and then our understanding of it will catch up eventually, right? And so I don't know for a fact exactly what's happening there. I can tell you it looks very similar to something that happened in our church in 2003 in Muskegon, Michigan, a church that we had planted up there. And we had several weeks of where people just started taking more and more time for prayer. There was nothing orchestrated. Nobody was trying to make it happen. I just noticed that the prayer room before service was full. I noticed that our prayer meetings were getting fuller and fuller. But nobody was manipulating it. Nobody was demanding it of anyone. There was no setup. Can I just say that? And then, the Spirit of God just was weighing heavy on our congregation on a Sunday morning in a way that I just don't have words for. But people were just repenting, sometimes even publicly, weeping. It was like this heaviness in the room that just swept through the room, and it lasted for 3 weeks. And in the course of 3 weeks, people got really tired, because when you disrupt your entire schedule for 3 weeks, and you're constantly at the church building, I can tell you, a number of people got, accepted Christ during that time. A lot of really wonderful things happened that we got to see the fruit of over a course of many months and years. But here's the thing that characterized it. People got tired. You can't just be at the church building all the time for 3 weeks and it didn't disrupt your schedule. And so eventually it just slowed to a stop. And then the word was, well, if it was real revival, would it have stopped? Well, if it wasn't real, I guess it'll do until the real thing comes along, okay? And so I would say in this case where you're seeing people's lives being touched, I think it'll do for now. And in the interim, you and I can just be patient and wait and see what God does. And we can call it what it is 6 months, 9 months, a year, 6 years from now when we see the fruit of it. But between now and then, let's just pray that God would continue to move among His people and begin with us personally, right? I mean, because I don't think there's any real revival that happens among a people if it doesn't first happen in my own heart. So, all right. That said, let's get into Mark chapter 8 this morning. Today we're picking up in Mark 8. And, before we dig into the text, just a couple of reminders, as we look at the Gospel of Mark, that we've called it Unveiled Mysteries for a purpose. There is a sense of unveiling of mysteries that parallel throughout the entire text, building in a particular direction, building in a sense of thematically, of introducing to us topics and ideas and put in a way of understanding them to build our understanding of who God is, what the kingdom of God is all about. So the book is not written chronologically. It's not that these events didn't happen, but that they're moved around, put in together in a particular way to make us aware of what God was doing in that group of people and to bring about great understanding. So he wanted us to simply understand that who Jesus was, and he's speaking primarily to a Gentile audience, people who did not know God, and so he lays things out in a way for them to realize that what it means to be Messiah, what it means to be the Son of God, and directs those things thematically to create greater understanding. He does the same thing in our understanding of the kingdom of God, contrasting the ideas of what the kingdom of God was like, what kingdoms are like, with that of the people in his day and their expectations with actually what Jesus was teaching. And so this sense of contrast occurs throughout the majority of the book, leading us to our point here today, chapter 8. There are 16 chapters in the book of Mark, and if you want to think about it this way, we're literally from the beginning, from January 1st to Easter. You're at the halfway point today. Congratulations, you didn't know that. But listen, it's the halfway point of the book. Even though it wasn't originally written in chapters, part of the reason it's that they broke the chapters up the way they did is specifically because literally in terms of context and in terms of events, this is the epicenter of the book. Everything is going to shift beginning next week. Leading up to this point, we've been talking about that mystery, we've been talking about the kingdom and explaining those things, explaining who they are and what they're about. So we hit the exclamation point, if you will, this week on those things. And then beginning next week, the whole entire focus shifts to the idea of the suffering servant. It will totally change our focus in the book. Even those other things will be talked about and hinted at still, the whole focus of the book will become on the suffering servant and what he did in taking on the sins of the world. So last week, chapter 7, we were building and we got to the point where the Gentiles are being welcomed by Jesus in a way that is completely surprising to Peter and the rest of the disciples, surprising to the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, and everything else. And he's been hinting at it. They've been in the region of the Decapolis. That's the region east of the Sea of Galilee. They've been there, and it is a mixed region of both Jews and Gentiles. And so as the gospel is being proclaimed, events have been happening, unfolding, that are hinting that he is not only the God of the Jews, but he's the God of the Gentiles. He's not only the Messiah of the Jews, he's the Messiah of the Gentiles. And then in that breaking of bread and the feeding of the 4,000, there's the clear message being made and in some instances, and especially in the Gentile community, being received. That there is more than enough, that God's economy is not stifled, that it is not dependent on outside resources, it is not limited in its scope or its capacity, it's not limited in its ability to feed those who are hungry, it's not limited in its power to heal just Jews, but He can heal Jew and Gentile, that the whole world, that Yahweh, the God of creation, the God who birthed all these things, brought everything into existence, the good God who is God of all, not only loves the Jews, but he loves the Gentiles, and there's more than enough for everyone at the table. That leads us here into chapter 8 and the exclamation point that we're talking about, the primacy of the king and his kingdom. And so with that said, let's dig into the text. We're in Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 11. Ran a little bit into Mark 8 last week. Mark 8, beginning in verse 11. If you're using phone or tablet, please set those to silent for the sake of those around you. I'm going to read from the English Standard Version. Please follow along in whatever translation you have, the one in your lap. Always my favorite. Let's take a look. Mark 8:11. And the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Did you not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes you do not see and ears that you do not hear? Do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up?" They said to him, 12. "And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you take up?" And they said to him, 7. "Do you not understand?" They came to Bethsaida, and some of the people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked him, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not enter the village." Jesus went on with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And he told them, "John the Baptist." Others said Elijah, and some said one of the prophets. And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." And he charged him strictly to tell no one about him. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Again, calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever would lose his life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father and the holy angels." And he said to them, "Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power." Blessed be the reading of God's holy word. So as we open up this part of the passage, they're still there in the Decapolis, having just fed the 4,000. Last week we kind of spilled, like I said, from chapter 7 to pull that story into, to make the point because of the context. And truly, in many ways, we could have just continued to follow it through those first verses there, 11, 12, 13, 14, etc., and tied it all together. But one, it wasn't necessarily required for us to make sense of last week's passage, 1 and 2. Like the reality is, the longer it gets, I'm very familiar with the rule, maybe you are too, that the ear will only hear what the rear will endure. And so eventually, like if you just get tired of hearing me read the whole time and talk to you, eventually you're not paying attention and it doesn't do us much good anyhow. So we've tried, we stopped here, very purposeful, and so they're still in the Decapolis. They've just fed the 4,000. And then suddenly the Pharisees and the Herodians are decided they want to get into a battle of wits with Jesus, for which they seem completely unarmed. But more important here, listen, is that we realize that all of the things that have taken place. Remember, I said it's in the Decapolis. There are Jews and there are Gentiles both here. There's a lot of things that have unfolded, right? And there's this clear message about that how the gospel is expanding beyond the reach of Israel, and that there's this desire of Jesus to fulfill the vocation of Israel. Israel was always intended to be a light to the nations, the city on the hill, right? They were supposed to be hope for the nations. And as you and I have even looked at these different messianic passages that have been brought to light, and if you look at the others through the other Gospels, if you go back and study these passages in Isaiah, some of them in Deuteronomy and things like that, like there is this constant and clear message that the separation that Israel had in being distinct and different was not meant to look down on in judgment on the world, but to distinguish themselves so that as they brought the good news, as they became heralds of hope and light and healing of the nature of God, that they were supposed to stand out in a peculiar way and be able to use that as a launching pad for bringing the good news to the nations, to the Gentiles. And instead, they abdicated that and preferred it as an opportunity to look down on their neighbors and how they were different than them and to remove themselves from the situation so they could just simply sit in judgment of them. And how dangerous that is for the people of God. Anytime that we see our distinctiveness, see what God is doing in our lives as exalting ourselves so that we could look down on people rather than recognizing that our desperate need, right? Romans is talking to Jew and Gentile both, that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We do not think of ourselves as better people. We do not think of ourselves as being a people who are favored by God over others, but instead that we have that same compelling need for salvation. We have that same compelling need to hear the heartbeat of God and to join Him, to reject the kingdom of darkness, to reject the kingdoms of this world, and to press into the kingdom of God. So there is this call that's upon us all, and Jesus then is declaring Himself to be fulfilling the very vocation that Israel was supposed to have. He calls us then, as His disciples, to also fulfill that vocation, to be the city on the hill, the light to the nations, as He proclaims it throughout the Gospels, as it's proclaimed even in the closing of the Gospels and the Great Commission, as we look at the book of Acts unfolding, like there's this clear message over and over again, and that when God's people decide that we're satisfied with what we have, if it's us four and no more, if we are satisfied with the gospel having come to our family, but we turn a blind eye to the lost, our neighbors, our friends, our families, even the nations around the world, that in fact that we are saying with our mouth, we believe that you are Lord, but with our actions we are denying that to be true. You cannot say Jesus is Lord and then refuse to send the gospel to the nations, or simply say, well, there's enough lost people here, we don't need to do that. That is literally defying the very final commandment of Jesus before He ascended into heaven, right? I mean, like here's this great message, last parting words. What's the great message? Go to the nations. And then we say, well, I want you to be my Lord as long as it's just forgiveness, but if I like the Savior part, but not the Lord part, where I don't want to send my neighbors, my friends, my family, my children to the ends of the earth. I'll send them for other reasons. Might send them to go defend our great political viewpoint of freedom for all lands and democracy and things like that, but I don't want to send them to a Muslim country where they could lose their life for the sake of the God. Losing your life for patriotism, check. Losing your life for the kingdom of God, not so much. And what about our resources and our commitments? And of course, you know, there is so much wrapped deeply up in that. In this moment, as He's doing all of this, these Pharisees and these Herodians approach Him, and they're deeply concerned about the message that Jesus is preaching. It is completely contrary to everything that they believe, anything that they wanted. And so He is making both sides angry, right? The Pharisees and the Sadducees, unfortunately, have much more in common than they are different. When you and I are just kind of standing back from a time scope of history, it's easy for us to just kind of see them as kind of the same thing because they're being lumped together in that perspective. But I want you to think of it in terms of like modern experience. Deeply religious group of people, and then another group of people who are deeply secular and self-centered. And we would think to ourselves, those two things don't have anything in common. And yet what Jesus is telling us very clearly, what Mark is conveying to us very clearly, is they know they are exactly the same thing, because they are still power brokers. They are still acting in the ways of the world. Even the most religious ones are acting in the ways and in the benefit of the world. There's not a concern for the gospel. There's not a concern for the hope and the healing of the nations. These are curiosity seekers, not inquisitive followers. Consider the fact that he literally just fed 4,000 people with 7 loaves of bread. I want you to think for just a moment how far 7 loaves of bread would go at your house. My house had to be about 7 people. Give it or take. We like to eat. I've got one daughter who loves bread, right? Okay. So the reality is that feeding thousands of people, 4,000 people, we're talking about a very significant miracle, a significant sign. And they go, show us another, show us another. Like little kids, come on, do it again. Show us another trick. Show us another trick. And what we're dealing with is that there's no real desire to know what he's talking about. There's no real desire for God to move. There's I don't know if it's boredom. I don't know if they're hoping he's going to run out of signs. Maybe it's to catch him in some sleight of hand or deception or worse. But it's really the very same group of people. Now, it's not that this has never happened before, but this time the tenor's different, because Jesus does not suffer the fools and refuses to entertain the mindless and endless demand for a sign. He tells them, very matter of fact, you just want a sign, and I will not entertain you anymore. He makes a grand exit via the boat and heads back to the Jewish side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. If you ever run across that, same sea, one's the Roman name, one's the Jewish name. As they're going across, Jesus is obviously thinking about what's just happened. It's filling his mind. You ever been in a situation, maybe you or your spouse, and a series of events happened that seemed fairly innocuous at the time, but all of a sudden you find yourself pondering, you're realizing that more took place there than was actually said, or it seemed too obvious to the naked eye. Like you realize something just transpired in reaction between people and things like that, and you start to ponder those events. You start to ponder the words that were spoken. Things that seemed, little or even petty, all of a sudden begin to sound like you're thinking to yourself, there's more to this situation. And you stop and ponder, and then all of a sudden, out comes out of your mouth your thoughts, and everybody's like, who, what, huh? And then all of a sudden you've got like an Abbott and Costello routine going on. If you don't know who Abbott and Costello are, you can YouTube it later. Not right now, please, because I'll lose you right there. But, it's kind of like who's on first, what's on second, I don't know, third base, and everybody's kind of like, they're lost in this conversation. Jesus, it has, these events have just taken place, and by all means, we would say to ourselves, how did they not catch this? But if you're honest with yourself and you think about the times when something like that, an event has unfolded, and listen, these events were unfolding all the time. They were constantly having these kind of experiences, interactions with other people who were listening, people who weren't listening, people who were seeing and not seeing and all that. And so why was this one any different? But clearly it has captivated the heart and mind of Jesus. And in the midst of them talking about other things, all of a sudden Jesus says to them in a very powerful way, watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Now, if you just think for just a moment, like slow down, and like ponder those events, like we're not talking about, like it's not like they lived in the day of Monsanto and he said, hey, the genetically modified seed is going to mess you up, okay? It's not like he's saying something like, he's not like saying, well, there's a kind of yeast out there that's not good for you. Like all of those things, even if that was true, like, what does that have to do with the events that just unfolded, right? They're literally in the boat, making their way from those events. And they start, like, kind of talking kind of silly and ridiculous. And Jesus just calls them to account in that moment. Like, it brings them to a sharp point and says, you're worried about one loaf of bread versus what? I use 7 and I feed 4,000. I couldn't use one loaf of bread and feed everybody in the boat? I'm like, I think in a way it's kind of like going, hey, pay attention. Did you not see? Did you not hear? But then he goes really kind of to the heart of the issue. Do you not understand after all this time? Are your hearts so hard? Remember who he's speaking to. He's speaking to his disciples, right? They've been with him now at this point over 2 years. We're reaching into that 3rd year at this point. They've been with him. They've done signs and wonders. They've seen signs and wonders on a regular basis. It's not the evidence that they're lacking. Instead, there's a lack of clarity. Their eyes, in many ways, have been opened, but yet they, in many ways, do not see clearly. They have a misunderstanding. They have concepts of the kingdom that go back to their ideas about of what a Messiah is supposed to be like. They have ideas about the kingdom of God, about what it's supposed to be like. They're worried about Rome. They're worried about treachery. And so constantly, even though they're hearing things being taught to them on a regular basis this way, they're constantly unpacking it in a way that things that Jesus didn't say or do. I mean, we will get all the way down to the end, and Peter will draw his sword and cut off Malchus's ear because he still thinks that it's going to be a political uprising. He's still believing that they're going to oppress the enemies of God. But that's not what he's been preaching. And they still won't get it, even in one of the most crucial moments of their lives and in their experience with Jesus. Before we're too rough on the disciples, then, isn't it true that sometimes you and I have experiences with God and encounters with God, or we read through the Bible and we find things, and have you ever done this? I've done this so many times, it's almost comical, where I will find a note in my Bible where I made this note, and I'm like, first of all, I'm reading that text and I see something attached to that note that you know how many times I've read the Bible through, and I'm thinking to myself, how did I miss that? How did I not see that was in there, right? About the hardening of their heart, or how many years it had been, or whatever else, and it will be this moment where I go, wow, that's crazy. What's crazier is that when I see the note in my own handwriting, that where somebody at some point has explained that to me, and I heard it all those years ago, and I'm just now beginning to make sense. At the moment, thank you for the grace of God. At that moment, God pointed out, hey, make a note of that. You're going to need that later. Right now, you're too dense to hear it. Did God do that with you? Just me, I guess. But anyhow, so here's the thing, is that they're having this experience with Him, and they're not seeing everything. And then all of a sudden, we go from going across the lake to being in Bethsaida and the healing of the deaf man. Now, listen, it is a real healing of a deaf man. A blind man. Last week was the deaf man. This week's the blind man. And it's a real healing, but remember what I said is that it's not written chronological in the book of Mark. That means this event didn't necessarily happen right after they left it. So it could have been weeks, it could have been months, it could have been the next day. I don't know. I can't tell you. The text doesn't tell me. But there's this kind of radical move where one moment we're on the lake, and the next moment we're all the way over in Bethsaida with no segue or whatever. And I guess we could look at that and go, wow, gosh, Mark is such a good writer. Why did he drop off the thing? Where was the nice segue? We wonder, did Mark look back later on and go, I could have done a better segue right here. It would have been more interesting. No, it's intentional. The book is very well written. So why is it so abrupt? It's so abrupt because not only is Jesus healing the man, but he's telling us something that's really poignant. That the disciples, though they have been walking with Jesus for nearly 3 years and they have seen so much, that it's clear that they do not see clearly. They are still very wrapped up in their own ideas, their own concepts. You know, if you've been walking with Jesus for any amount of time, I promise you that you are constantly realizing how that God is showing you things, sometimes again, sometimes for the first time, and that you find yourself like in this journey with Him where there is one sense in which you have been radically healed and where your eyes are opened and you are seeing things for the very first time, and it's a really dramatic and powerful experience, and yet on the other hand in which you don't always see everything clearly, that you and I are still wrapped up in the ways of this world, our concepts about the world, the things we want, the things we like, the things we don't like, and that all of those things we're constantly making our way through the murky. So Jesus spits in his eyes, and he opens his eyes, and he can see, and he says, I see people like trees, like walking around. Now, if it was not Jesus, if it was just like one of the disciples, I would be thinking to myself when he spit in their eyes and then he didn't totally get healed, instantaneously, I'd have been like, sounded better in your head, didn't it? Like, you ever done that where you thought something you were going to say or do was like going to be really cool and dramatic, and then you did it and it just like went, fell flat, and you're like, well, that really seemed a whole lot more impressive in my head than, wow. Listen, I don't know how many times that the healings of Jesus were not complete and dramatic. This is the only one recorded. On the other hand, I know that very few of Jesus' miracles were actually recorded according to John because there just wasn't room. And so select ones were put together for our understanding, to teach us. But not all of them are included. But what I do know is that he prayed for them, and he spit in his eyes, and he saw partially, and then he saw later fully. Now, while I can say that definitely has a powerful metaphorical message, from a very practical standpoint, I also believe that, listen, even when you go to pray for people, and everything doesn't happen as dramatically as you would like to happen, like, that doesn't qualify or disqualify. We just wait on the Lord. So you might need to pray again. I don't know. But in the midst of all of this, he brings about this healing, and the people are just absolutely stunned, and there's this dramatic proclamation that he's the healing God. He's healing this person who is, again, in a mixed region and all. The Gospels continue to go out. But then the clue is, right, it's this perfect segue setting us up for what Jesus is about to ask his disciples. See, up to this point, they think they know who he is. And so he asks them the question, who do they say that I am? And he tells them the things that you read probably over and over again in the Gospels. Well, some say that you're John the Baptist, and we read that a couple of weeks ago in the account in Mark because Herod thought it was John the Baptist come back to life. He reads and he says, the prophet. And it's referring back to a teaching out of Deuteronomy. And in Messianic tradition, in Deuteronomy, there's a passage about the passing of leadership from Moses to Caleb. And in that process, as they're talking, he says, now the Lord is going to raise up from amongst you in your midst one like me who will do the same kinds of signs and wonders and even greater things than these. And there's this promise. And then Caleb steps on the scene as becomes the emerging leader. And that passage is often referred to as the great seal of the prophets. However, later, they experience the ministry of Elijah. And Elijah, listen, there's miracles that happen between Moses and Elijah. You turn through your Bible, and almost every chapter of the Bible has a miracle somewhere. So, there's this, but there are definitely some periods of time that stand out as kind of exclamation points on what God is doing in the world. And so first exclamation point is Moses and Caleb, right? And then the next exclamation point that kind of hits all of this is we got Elijah and Elisha. Elijah, all the miracles that are happening there are amazing. Now, here's the thing. Equally as impressive miracles happening under Elisha. Can I just point out, Jesus and the disciples, equally impressive miracles happen through the hands of the apostles as happened with Jesus. So there's these exclamation points sometimes, right, where we see God moving in a powerful way, and we watch and wonder at what God is doing in the world. We join with the words of Habakkuk, Lord, we've heard about what you've done in the past, in the days of old, and we say, would you do again in our day what you did in the days of old? There's this longing in the heart's desire of God's people to see those things. Nonetheless, in this particular situation, they are literally quoting the expectations of the day. Some say you're Moses. Some say you're Elijah. Some say you are the prophet. And they're referring to an entire doctrine about Messiah. See, if you'll remember from your Old Testament, Moses, when they got to the promised land, didn't get to go in. Instead, he went up on a mountainside and he looked as the people were going in. He got to look at the promised land from afar. He was not allowed to go in because of some things that he did and said. And so he watches as Caleb takes the people in, and he dies there on the mountain. And Jude tells us about a battle between Satan and the archangel over his body because Satan wanted to take his body and deceive the people with it. It doesn't tell us what his plans were, but you and I can imagine all kinds of horrendous things that he could do with that. But they didn't see him die. Enter Elijah. Next great huge period of miracles, right? And what happens to him? He is swept up in a whirlwind, and the chariot of fire comes down, sweeps him up and takes him off. And so then the people began to say, look at Moses, look at Elijah, and that's why in the New Testament it will talk about when the Elijah comes, even in the book of Micah, when the Elijah comes and he will turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children. And so this messianic expectation that was riveted all through that, we actually have a theological word for it, not that you really care that much, but it's called the Moses-Elijah revividus, the idea that Moses and Elijah coming back again. Remember when Jesus was standing on the mountain of transfiguration, who was with him? Moses and Elijah. Well, somebody's paying attention. So anyhow, so Moses and Elijah, and what does he say? Hear who? Him. Hear Jesus. Not Moses, not Elijah. We see all three appearing. He is answering that whole Moses-Elijah revividus. He is not Moses come back from the dead. He is not Elijah come back from the dead. He is my son, the only Son of God, the unique Son of God. It's making a standout. And he says, listen, you don't worship these guys. You worship him. And so there's this declarative moment when they're in this place, and he says, who do the people say I am? Well, some of them say this, some of them say that. And then he asks the most important, pivotal question. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Peter, always the first, first out of the boat, first to do, say dumb thing. I love Peter, right? And Peter opens up and he says, you're the Christ. Now, listen, if you and I go to some of the other Gospels, we know he said a little bit more than that. That's all the part he conveys to us because he's making, again, the point. And as well, he's not answering a Jewish audience that needs to know other things. He's just simply making the point. You are the Christ. sets him in complete contradistinction to everything else. Remember, on their way across the water, they didn't get it. They could see, but they could not see clearly. Here we are again, and they can see. But just 5 verses later, we realize they still do not see clearly. What happens 5 verses later? The worst day of Peter's life, right? The highest, the pinnacle of his experience, and the rock bottom of his walk with Christ. You're the Christ. Get behind me, Satan. Ever had a day like that? Where you're high and you're low, or like feet apart? You know, it's just like you're switching feet, you know, I don't know. And so he goes, you're the Christ. 5 verses later, may it never be. He spoke plainly to them. He explained what was going to happen. And see, here they've been listening to the unfolding of the kingdom. Here they've been learning about the kingdom of God. They've learned that this kingdom is completely unlike any other kingdom in this world. Can I point out to you, it's interesting, you know, that there's a man by the name of Will Durant. He wrote a multi-volume set called The History of the World, which when you think that all by yourself you can write the entire history of the world, there's a definite arrogance about that, okay? But one of those volumes was called Caesar and Christ, in which he dealt with the whole thing about how Christianity overcame Rome. And trust me, this man is not a believer. He's not on our side, does not like us, does not like Christianity. He is a hardcore atheist. And he said, what stood out about the people of Jesus, about the Christ and his movement, was that these people were so unlike the kingdoms of the world around them that they not only stood out, but like they drew great sympathy, because as the enemy tried everything it could to crush them, as Rome tried to crush them, they did not go to war. They didn't draw their swords. They didn't gun them down. They didn't win them by arguing them down or making them look stupid on Facebook or anything else. Listen, they outlived them. They lived in such a way that when they were marching into the sea, sometimes soldiers took off their belts and their weapons and marched into the sea to their death with them, because they said, whatever that is, that's what I want. I want a kind of a kingdom that transfers all the things, everything I've ever known, the idea of oppression and controlling people and everything. Like, whatever would make that guy walk into the sea, that's what I want. They were a kind of people that were wholly different. See, the thing about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Herodians, you know why they're all the same? Because they're power brokers. Can I tell you that historically, every time the church has gotten into power broking, it has been a bad thing. There's a whole period of time, a couple of 100 years, that historians call the Dark Ages. You know what's most significant about the Dark Ages? Nation states ruled by churches. We became just like the very thing that the Roman Christians gave their lives up to stop. And you can try to blame it all on the Catholic Church, which would be a fool's errand, but can I just point out to you a few things? See, it was not only true in the Holy Roman Empire. It was true of the Presbyterians when they ruled Scotland. It was true of the Anglicans when they ruled England. It was true of the Orthodox churches and their ruling of places in the East, and eventually it was one of the things that gave rise to the Soviet Empire, was to defeat Russian Orthodoxy and its hold over the people and its great oppression over the people, along with the kings, because they saw them as being one in the same and in league with one another. We're watching right now as Russian Orthodoxy is swallowing the same pill again, right? As they're standing alongside of Putin, and because at one time that they were disavowed and ignored or pushed to the margins or even oppressed and all under the reign of the Soviet Union, they found a new favor under Putin, and they're basking in it, and they're sanctioning a war that is completely bankrupt, corrupt, immoral, evil, and every bit of it. And they're siding with it. Can I point out that even the Puritans in North America, after fleeing from great persecution, persecuted their neighbors if they didn't agree with them in a way that was heavy-handed and physically abusive. Salem witch trials. I know there was lead poisoning, but let me tell you, when you think it's okay to drown people, could I even point out, dare I say, and please hear me carefully, please, please, please hear me carefully. Do not take what I'm saying out of context. But I would challenge you that right now that the response of the world around us to the American church, that many of our struggles right now were sown in the 80s and 90s when the moral majority used the techniques and the tactics of the world to try and make the whole world become Christian. By force if necessary, by the force of law. We tried to legislate people into behaving rightly as if their behavior was it. And we did not change their hearts. In fact, we hardened them. And they are accusing us now on the basis of those things. They think we are heartless. I know you. I know that's not true. But they got their information from reliable sources. It has never been a good thing when the kingdom of God acts like the kingdoms of this world. They're supposed to become like us when the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of our God in Christ. We're not supposed to use their techniques. We're not supposed to use their means. You and I cannot legislate them into becoming Christians. We cannot beat them into becoming Christians. We cannot talk over them loud enough. We cannot do enough advertising. Can I just point out to you, like, advertising is the way of the world. It's not our way. When we choose advertising because he gets us, instead of actually making friends with people, actually making disciples, putting our lives in theirs, when we use advertising as an excuse and we spend billions of dollars so that we don't have to actually talk to those filthy people, that's not a win. That is an utter failure. It's our way of saying, you can just go to hell as long as I'm comfortable. See, we might see, I don't know, maybe we've got a little too much spit in our eye. So he ends with these words, some will not taste death before the kingdom of God comes with power. Speaking of those events in Acts 2, when the Holy Spirit was poured out on Pentecost, you and I, we live in the post-Pentecost era. We live in that part of the kingdom now. It's a now and not yet kingdom. It's a now kingdom in that it's evident in deliverance and healing and salvation and power for living. It is a not yet kingdom in that not every knee has bowed, not every tongue is confessed. Sin and death still reign in the world. But every day, you and I are coming closer. We're nearly there. When you look in time scope of history, like, we are nearly there. However much longer it takes, even if it's 1,000 years, can I just tell you, in the scope of history, we are nearly there. And someday it's going to be revealed in its full glory. Until then, you and I have the opportunity to lean into that right now and listen to the words that he speaks when he tells them to die to themselves. Take up your cross, right on the heels of what everything he said to Peter. Who is Peter? Think about it in your mind's eye for just a moment. Who is Peter? He's not just an apostle. He's one of the deep inner circle of Jesus. He loves Jesus. He is Jesus' friend. He's his partner in ministry. Don't you know when Jesus told him that he was going to the cross, that was a gutting experience? it ripped him deep inside, right? I mean, he did not want Jesus to die. He wanted Jesus to have success. He wanted Jesus to be blessed. He wanted everything to be good for him. And he wanted to be right there by his side, but not just in a selfish way, like he loved Jesus. Just like you love your friends, like you love your family. Listen to the words that Jesus says when he rebukes him, besides calling him Satan. You have in mind the things of men, not the kingdom. You ever let the things of men get in the way of pursuing the kingdom? I don't know how many times I've heard people that, like on one hand will say, yes, we need to take missions to the very ends of the earth, but just don't take my children. Can I tell you the number one reason missionaries come back from the field or never even make it to the field is because their families, who would amply and quickly send them off as patriots to go to war, won't let them go and die on the battlefield of Islam for the sake of the gospel. So what have we said is actually the higher value? If I can send my children to war, but I can't send them to be a missionary, what's our higher value? And so there's this call, and sometimes it brings me into places where I've got to die to myself, my ways, my understanding, the things I want, the things about this life, that I would rather it be this way. Anybody ever been there where you've just thought to yourself, I'd rather it be this way, God, and then had to concede, nevertheless, your will, not mine? Which do I choose? The ways of the kingdom, the ways of God, or my own way, the way I want it to be? And I promise you, when Peter said those things, he wasn't thinking demonically and satanic. He was just joining in exactly what Satan had been trying to do in keeping Jesus from getting to the cross. Right? Whenever he took him to the pinnacle and he said, throw yourself down. Listen, do it my way. Put on a big show. Do something really dynamite. Advertise your way out of this. Find some other way to do this thing, but do not go to the cross. Do it my way. I'll make you king of the world. My way. And right now, Peter's doing the same thing. No, do it my way. Don't do it that way, because I love you. See, it wasn't exactly the same as Satan, but the end result was still the same, right? It's this whole thing of don't do the kingdom of God. Do what I want you to do. And so Jesus says very clearly as he looks at his disciples and he looks at the crowd and he tells us one and the same thing. If you want to follow me, you will have to pick up your cross and die to your way. You can't follow me and do it your way. Not because I won't let you, not because I don't love you, but because it is a physical impossibility. The ways of the kingdom are different, and it leads us to places, it takes us to places that we never expected, and along the way, hopefully that we begin to see more clearly and we say, yes, Lord, I will go with you to the very ends of the earth. I will send my family. I will give of my resources. I will give of my time. I will talk to my neighbor. I will make friends with those people that I don't like. I will pray for missionaries to go into the Islamic countries. I will send. I will go. I will be. I will do. I will lay this life down for the sake of the one to come. Father God, we just thank you right now for your kindness and the opportunity to come and experience your presence in our lives, your kingdom. But Lord, even as people are pouring themselves out on the floor of Asbury right now, we recognize that there is a desperate need for us as the people of God to relinquish our own way, to have it our own way. And there is a deep crying out to deep, as Psalm 42 says, of your voice stirring in the hearts of your people, calling us to a season of repentance, of declaring that your way is the way, and giving our lives to that. Giving ourselves to the things of the kingdom. And so we ask now, Lord, would you just stir deep within our hearts, deep within us as people right now? Would you stir us up, call deep unto deep? Would you create a holy fire within us that purges the things of this life and of the things of men and calls us to a place of utter dependence on you, calls us to a place of expectation, calls us to a heart burning with a desire to fulfill your good, pleasing, and perfect will. Stir us, O God. We need you. We confess that at times, just like the Apostle Peter, that we have had more endeared in our heart to the things of man than we've had endeared to you. That though we have confessed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, that oftentimes the realities of our hearts are far from it. That oftentimes we long for the way that we want it more than we long for your kingdom come. Though we sing, if I could have just one thing, that often we choose one thing else. Have mercy on us, O God. Stir our hearts. Can I ask prayer team, go ahead and come on up. So as the prayer team comes, let me say one, if God's stirring your heart about some things and you feel the need to pray with somebody, let me encourage you that you could pray with them about whatever. But if you're here right now and God is doing business deep within your heart about the things, your desires, your plans, and He's asking you to put those things on the altar, so to speak. I just want to invite you, wherever you are, could be in your seat, could be standing up here, could be laying down here somewhere. I don't care. But as the Lord deals with you on that right there, where He says, I'm asking you to lay down your plans, your life, for the sake of the kingdom. Let me just invite you to do that right now. So we say, come, Holy Spirit, and stir deep within us and bring to completion the good work that you began in us. Put your hands on our eyes afresh. Bring clarity of vision. Your will be done in us as it is in heaven. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed worshiping with us. If you would like more info about any of the ministry opportunities or to stay connected, please visit vinelife.church. If you're watching us on YouTube, stay up to date with us by subscribing and hitting the notification bell. You can also connect to us through Facebook and Instagram. God bless you as you love God, love people, and pass it on. We'll see you next week.